I'll notice something changed at the dinner table, a flash of recognition in someone's eyes, or maybe the way conversation suddenly stopped when I mentioned where I grew up. Whatever it was, that single moment would flip everything they thought they knew about me completely upside down, and I'd realize that sometimes the people who judge you the hardest are the ones who understand the least about what real wealth actually means. I stood outside the Hartwell estate trying to calm my nerves, smoothing down the only decent shirt I owned. My hands were shaking a little, and I hated that they were shaking. I'm 62 years old, and I faced down things that would make most people crumble. But somehow the thought of meeting my daughter-in-law's family for the first time had me rattled in a way I hadn't felt in years. The iron gates alone probably cost more than everything I'd owned in my entire life. Through them, I could see a circular driveway with a fountain in the middle, one of those fancy ones with angels pouring water from urns, and beyond that, a house that looked like it belonged in a magazine about how rich people live. My son Marcus had married Jennifer 8 months ago. It was a small wedding, just immediate family, and I'd met her parents briefly then. But this was different. This was dinner at their home, a formal invitation on cream-colored cardstock with raised lettering that Jennifer had mailed to my apartment 3 weeks earlier. I'd kept it on my refrigerator, reading it every morning with my coffee, feeling that familiar twist in my stomach that came from knowing I didn't quite fit into this world my son had entered. Marcus had done well for himself, full scholarship to college, then law school, now working at one of those firms downtown with his name on business cards so thick and expensive they felt like fabric. He'd earned every bit of it through intelligence and hard work, and I was proud of him in ways I could never fully express. But somewhere along the way, the distance between his life and mine had grown into something I could measure in more than just miles. I pressed the button on the intercom. A woman's voice answered immediately, professional and clipped. "Yes?" "It's Robert Chen. I'm here for dinner with the Hartwells." There was a pause, just long enough to make me wonder if I'd gotten the date wrong. Then the gates began to swing open with a quiet, mechanical hum. I walked up the driveway, my shoes, polished 3 times that afternoon, clicking against the smooth pavement. The fountain burbled cheerfully as I passed it, and I caught my reflection in one of the tall windows flanking the front door. I looked exactly like what I was, a man who'd worked with his hands his whole life, wearing clothes that were clean and pressed but unmistakably cheap, with the kind of weathered face that comes from years of outdoor labor and not enough sleep. The door opened before I could knock. A young woman in a black and white uniform smiled at me politely. "Mr. Chen, please come in. They're gathering in the sitting room." The sitting room. Not the living room, the sitting room. I followed her through a foyer with marble floors and a chandelier that cast prismatic light across oil paintings I recognized as the kind that sold for serious money at auction. The house smelled like expensive candles and fresh flowers. Everything was cream and gold and perfectly arranged, the kind of place where you were afraid to touch anything because your fingerprints might diminish its value. Jennifer appeared in the hallway, and her face brightened when she saw me. "Dad!" She'd started calling me that after the wedding, and every time she did, something in my chest loosened just a little. She kissed my cheek and linked her arm through mine. "I'm so glad you're here. Mom and Dad are excited to really get to know you." She was lying, and we both knew it, but I appreciated the effort. Jennifer was kind in a way that seemed genuine, not performed, and I understood why Marcus had fallen in love with her. She led me into a room where her parents stood by a fireplace that burned despite it being early September, because apparently when you had this much money, you could ignore the weather. Richard Hartwell extended his hand. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of tan that comes from golf courses and Caribbean vacations. His handshake was firm, calculated to convey confidence without aggression. "Robert, good to see you again. Glad you could make it." Catherine Hartwell offered her hand next, limp and cool, like she was granting me permission to briefly touch royalty. She was thin in that way wealthy older women often are, everything about her sharp and precise from her jewelry to her smile. "Yes, welcome. Marcus should be down shortly. He's just finishing a call." "Thank you for having me." My voice sounded rougher than I intended, with traces of an accent I'd spent years trying to soften but never quite eliminated. "Your home is beautiful." "Oh, this old place." Catherine waved dismissively, but her eyes gleamed with pride. "We've been here 23 years now. Keep saying we should downsize, but you know how it is. So much history in these walls." 23 years in a mansion. I'd lived in 14 different apartments in that same time span, each one smaller and cheaper than the last as medical bills and bad luck chipped away at everything I'd tried to build. A man about my age emerged from another doorway, holding a crystal glass with amber liquid. "Ah, the father of the groom!" His voice boomed with the kind of false heartiness that immediately put me on edge. "I'm Gerald, Catherine's brother. Heard a lot about you." I doubted that was true, but I shook his hand anyway. He was already half drunk. I could tell from the slight glassiness in his eyes and the way he stood just a little too close. Marcus came down the stairs, and relief flooded through me. My son, my boy, even though he was 31 now and taller than me by 3 inches. He crossed the room and hugged me, solid and real. "Hey, Dad, traffic okay?" "Took the bus. Wasn't bad." Something flickered across Richard's face. "The bus? You should have said something. We could have sent a car." "Oh no, the bus is fine. I take it everywhere." I tried to keep my voice casual, but I could feel the shift in the room, that subtle recalibration happening behind polite smiles. The bus. Of course he takes the bus. What else would someone like him do? Catherine gestured toward a collection of chairs and sofas arranged in a conversation area. "Well, shall we sit before dinner? Marcus, fix your father a drink. What would you like, Robert? We have just about everything." "Water's fine for me, thank you." Gerald laughed, loud enough that everyone turned to look at him. "Water? Come on, Robert, live a little. You're among friends here. Richard, pour the man some of that scotch you've been hoarding. The Macallan, the good stuff." "I don't drink," I said simply. The room got quieter. Gerald's smile faltered. "Oh, well, more for the rest of us then." We settled into seats that were somehow both incredibly expensive and uncomfortable. I perched on the edge of a cream-colored sofa that probably cost more than 6 months of my rent, hyper-aware of every movement I made. Catherine sat across from me in a high-backed chair that made her look like she was holding court, which I suppose she was. "So, Robert," Richard began, swirling his own scotch in its crystal tumbler, "Marcus tells us you worked in construction?" "Landscaping, mostly. Some construction when I was younger, but the last 30 years, landscaping." "How interesting." Catherine's tone suggested it was anything but. "That must be terribly hard on the body. I imagine you're looking forward to retirement?" I thought about the $743 in my savings account, the Social Security checks that barely covered rent and groceries, the fact that retirement wasn't something I could afford to look forward to so much as something I dreaded. "I stay busy. Keeps me young." "Well, you certainly look vital," she said, and I couldn't tell if it was a compliment or an observation about how I looked too weathered to be only 62. "And you've lived in the city your whole life?" "Since I came to America. 42 years now." "From China?" Gerald interjected. He'd refilled his glass and was working on making himself even friendlier. "What part?" "A small village in Guangdong province. You wouldn't have heard of it." "Try me. I've traveled extensively in Asia. Business, you know." "Shai Kun." He blinked at me. "You're right, never heard of it. Is that where Marcus gets his smarts from? I hear you people put a real emphasis on education." You people. The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus tensed beside me. Jennifer's hand found his, and I saw my son's jaw clench the way it used to when he was young and trying not to cry. "Marcus gets his intelligence from working hard," I said evenly. "Same as anyone." Of course, Gerald waved his hand. "No offense meant, just making conversation. It's impressive though, really, coming here with nothing, language barrier and all that. And now look at your son. American dream, right there." Catherine stood abruptly. "I should check on dinner. Robert, I hope you're not vegetarian or have any dietary restrictions. I should have asked earlier." "I eat anything, thank you." "Well, we're having duck, French preparation, a recipe I learned when Richard and I spent a summer in Provence. It's quite rich, so I hope you have the stomach for it." The implication being that maybe my peasant digestive system wasn't equipped for their sophisticated cuisine. I smiled. I'm sure it'll be delicious. She disappeared toward what I assumed was the kitchen, though in a house this size, who knew? The kitchen could have been in another zip code. Gerald settled deeper into his chair, his glass catching the firelight. So what's it like, Robert? Seeing your son end up in a place like this must be quite a change from how you grew up. Gerald, Jennifer said sharply, but he ignored her. No, I'm genuinely curious. I mean, here's Marcus, top of his class at Columbia Law, pulling down $200,000 a year at 28 years old, married into one of the oldest families in Connecticut. That's gotta feel surreal for you. Richard cleared his throat. Perhaps we should talk about something else. Why? It's a compliment. I'm saying the kid did good. Really pulled himself up, you know? Gerald looked at me with bleary sincerity. You must be proud. I am, I said quietly, every single day. As you should be. Though I've got to say, when Jennifer first told us about Marcus, we were a bit concerned. Not about him, of course, he's clearly exceptional. But you know how it is. Families like ours, we have certain expectations, certain standards. We were worried about compatibility, different backgrounds and all that. Gerald, that's enough. Richard's voice had steel in it now. What? I'm being honest. Isn't honesty better than pretending? He turned back to me. And look, it's worked out fine. Marcus fits in perfectly. You can barely tell he grew up, well, differently. Jennifer stood up. I'm going to help Mom with dinner. Marcus started to rise too, but I put my hand on his arm. It's okay, I murmured. I'd spent 42 years dealing with people like Gerald, people who thought their drunken honesty was somehow more virtuous than simple kindness. I could handle one more evening of it. Gerald seemed encouraged by my acceptance. See? Robert gets it. No hard feelings. The thing is, Robert, and I mean this respectfully, there are two kinds of people in this world. There are people who build empires, and there are people who maintain them. People who create wealth, and people who service those who have it. Nothing wrong with being the latter. Society needs laborers, groundskeepers, service workers, honorable work, all of it. Absolutely honorable, Richard agreed quickly, trying to steer his brother-in-law towards safer waters. Every profession has dignity. Exactly my point, Gerald continued, oblivious or uncaring about the tension crackling through the room. But let's be real here. Marcus made a leap, a huge leap, from one world to another, and that takes something special, something beyond what most people from his background could ever achieve. No offense to you, Robert, but your son is an outlier, an exception. I looked at this man, with his expensive watch and his third scotch, and his absolute certainty that he understood anything about my life or my son's life, and I felt something old and familiar settle in my chest. Not anger exactly, though there was some of that. More like a deep, bone-tired sadness at how people could live entire lives and learn nothing about what actually mattered. Marcus worked hard, I said, but he's not an exception to anything. He's exactly what I always knew he could be. Well, sure, of course you'd say that. You're his father. Gerald leaned forward conspiratorially. But between us, man to man, doesn't it ever bother you? That he's moved so far beyond where you ended up? That he's got this whole life you could never give him? I'd imagine that's got to sting a little, seeing what he has compared to what you have. Marcus stood up so fast his drink nearly tipped over. That's way out of line. Marcus, sit down, I said softly. It's fine. It's not fine, Dad. He's being incredibly rude. I'm being honest, Gerald protested. Your father and I are just having a real conversation. Adults can handle straight talk. Richard stood as well, his face flushed. Gerald, you've had too much to drink. Maybe you should go sleep it off before dinner. I've had 3 drinks, Richard. I'm fine. And I don't know why everyone's getting so sensitive. I'm paying Robert a compliment, saying his son transcended his circumstances. What's wrong with that? Catherine returned, took one look at the scene, and her expression went cold. What's going on? Nothing, Gerald said. Just getting to know our new in-law here, learning about his fascinating life of manual labor. Oh, for God's sake, Gerald. Catherine turned to me with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. I apologize for my brother. He doesn't know when to stop. It's all right, I said, even though it wasn't. No, it's not all right. Marcus's voice was shaking now. Dad, we can leave. We don't have to stay here and listen to this. I looked at my son, at the anger and hurt and shame warring across his features, and I wanted to protect him the way I had when he was small. But he wasn't small anymore, and this was a battle he'd have to learn to fight himself if he was going to build a life in this world. We're not leaving, I said. Your wife went to the trouble of inviting us. We're going to have dinner. Jennifer had appeared behind her mother, her face pale. Maybe we should all just start over, pretend the last 10 minutes didn't happen. Why pretend? Gerald was warming to his theme now, energized by the reaction he'd gotten. Look, I get it. You're all trying to be politically correct, trying to act like we don't notice the differences. But they're there. Robert knows it. We know it. He's from a completely different world than we are. Different values, different education level, different everything. And that's fine. Diversity makes America great and all that. But let's not pretend we're all the same. We're not pretending anything, Richard said tightly. What we're trying to do is have a civilized dinner. And we will. I'm just saying, it's obvious that Robert here probably feels out of place. Look at this house, Richard. Look at what you've built. The man takes the bus. He probably lives in some tiny apartment somewhere, barely scraping by on Social Security or whatever small pension landscape companies give their workers. And here's his son, married into our family, living in a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights that's worth $3 million. That's gotta be a mindfuck. Pardon my French. The word mindfuck seemed to echo in the high-ceilinged room. Catherine closed her eyes briefly. Gerald, you need to leave. Now. Why? Because I'm saying what everyone's thinking? Because you're being cruel, Jennifer said quietly. And you're drunk, and you're embarrassing yourself and everyone else. I'm not embarrassed, I said, and everyone turned to look at me. I've been embarrassed before, many times. This isn't one of them. Gerald laughed. See, he's fine. Robert's a tough guy. Had to be, living the life he's lived. You don't know anything about my life. The words came out softer than I intended, but there was something in my tone that made Gerald's smile falter. Well, no, not specifically, but I can guess. You came here with nothing, worked whatever jobs you could find, struggled to learn English, lived in those immigrant neighborhoods where everyone from your country clusters together. Probably sent money back home to China for years, worked yourself to the bone to give your kid a shot at something better. It's a familiar story, admirable in its way. Gerald. Richard's voice was sharp now. Stop talking. But Gerald was past listening to anyone. The Scotch had loosened something in him, some need to prove himself superior, to make sure everyone in the room understood the hierarchy. I'm just being real here. Robert clearly did the best he could with what he had. It's not his fault he never had opportunities. Different generation, different circumstances. But facts are facts. The man is poor. There's no shame in it, but there's no point pretending otherwise either. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the fire seemed to stop crackling. Marcus had gone completely still beside me, his hands clenched into fists. Jennifer looked like she might cry. Richard and Catherine stood frozen, probably calculating how much damage control this dinner would require. I took a slow breath and looked at Gerald, really looked at him. Saw the insecurity beneath the bravado, the need to diminish others to feel larger himself. I'd seen it 1,000 times before in 1,000 different faces. You're right, I said calmly. I am poor. By your standards, by most standards. I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Flushing. Rent-controlled, thank God, or I couldn't afford even that. I take the bus because I don't own a car. Haven't owned one in 15 years. Can't afford the insurance, the maintenance, the parking. My entire wardrobe probably costs less than that watch you're wearing. The shirt I have on, I bought it at a discount store 3 years ago for $19, and I've worn it to every important occasion since because it's the nicest thing I own. Gerald blinked, surprised by my directness. Catherine had turned away, staring at one of her expensive paintings. Marcus started to speak, but I held up my hand. I eat rice and vegetables most nights because meat is expensive. I haven't been to a dentist in 6 years. I have a flip phone, not a smartphone, because I don't need internet in my pocket and can't justify the cost. When winter comes, I keep my heat low and wear layers because the electric bill matters. Every dollar matters. You want to know about my life? That's my life. You're not wrong about any of it. Dad, Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. Let me finish. I looked around the room at all of them. You look at me and you see poverty. You see someone who failed to achieve what you've achieved, someone who doesn't belong in a house like this, at a table like yours, and maybe you're right about that too. Maybe I don't belong here. Jennifer made a small sound of protest, but I continued. But I want to tell you something about my son, about how he got to where he is. Because Gerald here seems to think Marcus is some kind of exceptional anomaly, like he pulled himself up by his bootstraps out of the mud through sheer force of will. And that's a nice story, very American, but it's not the whole truth. I turned to look at Marcus, and his eyes were wet. When Marcus was 8 years old, he wanted to join the chess club at school. It cost $35 for the year. $35 doesn't sound like much to people like you, but for us, it was groceries for a week. It was the electric bill. So you know what I did? I took a second job, cleaning offices at night after my landscaping shifts, mopping floors and emptying trash cans from 9 p.m. to 2 in the morning, then back up at 5:30 to be at my regular job by 7. I did that for 3 years so Marcus could play chess, could go on field trips, could have the things other kids had. The room was completely still. Catherine had turned back to face me, her expression unreadable. When he was in high school and needed a computer for his classes, I worked every Saturday and Sunday for 8 months straight. No days off, not one. Landscaping work is hard on the body, but it's harder when you never rest. I was 51 years old and my back felt 80, but Marcus needed that computer. When he got accepted to Columbia and the scholarship didn't cover everything, you know what I did? I took out loans. Loans I'm still paying off now, at 62 years old. I'll probably be paying them until I die. Marcus was crying openly now, tears running down his face. Jennifer had her arm around him. I sold everything I had of any value, my father's watch that I'd carried from China, some gold jewelry my wife had left behind. I cashed out the tiny life insurance policy I'd been paying into. I borrowed from friends, from our community association, from anyone who would lend to me, because my son was going to go to Columbia University, and nothing was going to stop that. I stood up, feeling every one of my 62 years in my knees and back. So when you say Marcus transcended his circumstances, Gerald, what you really mean is that I made sure his circumstances were different than mine. Every choice I made, every dollar I earned, every hour I worked, it all went to making sure my son had chances I never had. That's not transcendence. That's not some genetic anomaly. That's called being a parent. Gerald's face had gone red. He looked down at his drink. You want to know what's in my bank account? $743. That's it. That's everything I have in the world. No retirement fund, no investments, no property. When I die, there won't be an estate to settle or assets to divide. But my son is a lawyer at a top firm. My son married a woman he loves who comes from a good family. My son will never know what it's like to choose between medicine and food. And you know what that makes me? I looked at each of them in turn. Richard, Catherine, Gerald, Jennifer, and finally Marcus. Rich, I said quietly. That makes me the richest man in this room. The silence stretched out. Catherine's hand had gone to her throat. Richard was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Gerald looked like he'd been slapped. Every sacrifice I made, I'd make again. Every hard year, every exhausting day, every moment of struggle, I'd live through it all another 100 times for my son. You think I feel bad about what I don't have? You think I'm ashamed standing in this beautiful house with my second-hand shirt and my bus pass? I'm not. Because I look at Marcus and I see everything I've ever done right in this world. I see the meaning of my entire life. Marcus crossed the room and wrapped his arms around me, and I held my son the way I'd held him when he was small, when the world seemed too big and too hard, and all he needed was to know that someone loved him unconditionally. He was sobbing into my shoulder, and I felt his whole body shaking. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. I never knew about the loans. I never knew you were still paying them." "Why would you know? That wasn't your burden to carry. It was mine, and I carried it gladly. I pulled back and looked at him. You have nothing to apologize for. Not to me, not to anyone. Jennifer had tears streaming down her face, too. She came over and hugged both of us, and I felt her trembling. I'm so sorry, she said. I'm so ashamed of my family right now. Don't be, I told her. You're not responsible for other people's words. Catherine moved then, crossing the room with quick steps. For a moment, I thought she might ask us to leave, might decide that I'd made too much of a scene in her perfect home. But instead, she stopped in front of me, and her eyes were bright with tears she was fighting to control. I apologize, she said, and her voice was tight. Gerald was inexcusably rude, and Richard and I should have stopped him sooner. We should have stopped him the moment he started. She glanced at her brother, who was studying his scotch glass like it contained the secrets of the universe. What you've done for your son is extraordinary. What you've sacrificed. I don't think any of us truly understood. You weren't meant to understand, I said. It's not something I talk about. Marcus didn't even know most of it. Richard came forward, extending his hand again, but this time it felt different. Robert, I think I owe you an apology as well. Not for what Gerald said, but for my own assumptions, for the way I looked at you when you arrived tonight. I'm ashamed to admit that I judged you based on superficial things, your clothes, the fact that you took the bus. I made assumptions about your worth as a person based on your bank balance. I shook his hand. Most people do. I'm used to it. That doesn't make it right. He held my grip firmly. Jennifer told us you were a good man, and we should have trusted her judgment instead of our own prejudices. Gerald finally stood up, swaying slightly. His face was flushed, whether from alcohol or shame, I couldn't tell. I'm going to go, he mumbled. I'll call a car. Gerald, Catherine's voice stopped him. You owe Robert an apology. I know, I don't know what to say. He turned to face me, and for the first time that evening, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. I was out of line, way out of line. I said things that were cruel and ignorant, and I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I am sorry. I nodded. Apology accepted. We all say things we regret sometimes. That's generous of you. He shook his head. More generous than I deserve. He left the room, and a moment later we heard the front door close. The atmosphere shifted after he was gone, like someone had opened a window and let fresh air into a stuffy room. Catherine took a deep breath and managed a small smile. Well, this wasn't quite how I imagined this evening going. Shall we try to salvage it with dinner? The duck is probably perfect by now, and it would be a shame to waste it. We moved into the dining room, which was somehow even more impressive than the sitting room. A long table that could easily seat 20 was set for 6, with candles and flowers and more silverware than I knew what to do with. I sat where Jennifer indicated, and Marcus settled beside me. As Catherine and Jennifer brought out the food with the help of the woman who'd answered the door, Richard poured wine for everyone except me. He paused. I have some excellent sparkling water, Robert, if you'd like it. It's from Italy, naturally carbonated. That sounds nice, thank you. The duck was as good as Catherine had promised, rich and perfectly cooked with some kind of cherry sauce that was both sweet and tart. There were roasted vegetables that had probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget, and a grain I didn't recognize but tasted nutty and delicious. I ate carefully, remembering my table manners from when Marcus was young and practicing for school events, when we'd sit at our small kitchen table and pretend we were at a fancy restaurant. The conversation started carefully, everyone dancing around safe topics, the weather, Marcus's recent cases, in vague terms that didn't violate confidentiality. Jennifer's work at the nonprofit she'd founded. But gradually, as the meal progressed, something shifted. Catherine asked me about China, about my village, and for once it didn't feel like tourism or condescension. She genuinely seemed to want to know. It was very small, I told her. Maybe 300 people when I was growing up. Farming village, mostly rice. My father was a teacher, which was unusual. Most people worked the fields. So education was valued in your family, Richard observed. Very much. My father believed it was the only way out of poverty. He was right, just not in the way he imagined. He thought I'd become a teacher too, maybe move to a larger town. He never imagined I'd cross an ocean. "What made you come to America?" Jennifer asked softly. I took a sip of the sparkling water, letting the bubbles dance on my tongue while I thought about how to answer. "My wife," I said finally. "Marcus's mother. She had family here, distant cousins who'd emigrated in the 70s. They said there were opportunities, that we could build a better life. We were young and optimistic, and we believed them." Marcus had gone still beside me. He never liked talking about his mother. "She passed away when Marcus was 4, I continued. "Cancer. We'd only been here 2 years, and we didn't have good insurance. By the time they caught it, it was too late. She was gone within 6 months. Catherine's hand went to her heart. "Oh, Robert, I'm so sorry. That must have been devastating." It was the hardest thing I've ever been through. Suddenly I was alone in a country where I barely spoke the language, with a small child to raise, and medical bills that were more than I'd earn in 5 years. Her family helped some, but they had their own struggles. Most immigrants do. I looked down at my plate. For a while, I thought about going back to China, taking Marcus and just admitting defeat. But my wife made me promise, before she died, that I'd keep him here. She said he'd have chances in America that he'd never have back home. She made me swear it. "So you stayed," Richard said quietly. "I stayed. I found work doing landscaping because it didn't require much English. You can understand cut grass and trim hedges in any language. The man who hired me, Mr. Rodriguez, he was kind. He paid me in cash at first, before I got my papers sorted out. He taught me enough English to get by. He's the one who encouraged me to learn to read and write it properly, not just speak it for work." "Did you keep in touch with him?" Jennifer asked. "He died 8 years ago. Heart attack while mowing a lawn. I went to his funeral and his widow hugged me and said her husband always talked about me, about how hard I worked. That meant a lot." I smiled at the memory. He'd be proud to know Marcus became a lawyer. He used to joke that Marcus was too smart for his own good, always asking questions about everything. Marcus finally spoke, his voice rough. "I remember Mr. Rodriguez. He used to let me help water the plants. He'd give me a small watering can and tell me I was his best employee." "You were 5 years old and you'd water the same plant 15 times while the others died of thirst," I said, and everyone laughed. The sound was warm and genuine, and I felt something in my chest loosen further. The meal continued and the conversation flowed more easily now. Catherine told stories about Jennifer as a child, how she'd been obsessed with horses and had begged for riding lessons. Richard talked about his own father, who'd built the family business from a small manufacturing company into something much larger. There was still wealth in their stories, still privilege I could barely imagine, but there was also humanity. They were people who loved their daughter, who worried about her, who wanted her to be happy. "I have to admit something," Catherine said as we finished the main course. "When Jennifer first told us she was dating Marcus, I looked him up. I know that sounds terrible, but I did. I found his LinkedIn profile, his law school records, everything I could find online." Jennifer groaned. "Mom, that's so embarrassing." I know, but I'm a mother, and I wanted to know who my daughter was spending time with." She looked at me. "What I couldn't find was much about his family. There were no social media profiles for you, Robert, no digital footprint, and I'm ashamed to say that I filled in that blank with assumptions. I assumed it meant you were either absent from Marcus's life or that there was something to hide." "I don't have Facebook or any of that," I said. "Never saw the need. My flip phone makes calls and that's all I require." I realize now how wrong my assumptions were. When Marcus proposed to Jennifer and we met you at the wedding, I still had those preconceptions. I saw a man who seemed uncomfortable in a suit, who didn't make small talk easily, and I worried that you and Marcus weren't close, that maybe he'd had to overcome a difficult childhood. Marcus shook his head. "My childhood was the opposite of difficult. Dad made sure of that." "I'm seeing that now." Catherine's voice was soft. "I'm seeing a lot of things differently now." Richard stood and began clearing plates. "Let me help," I said automatically, starting to rise. "Absolutely not. You're our guest." But he said it kindly, not like he was putting me in my place. While they were in the kitchen, Marcus turned to me. "Dad, why didn't you tell me about the loans? All this time I thought the scholarship covered everything." "It covered most things. And what it didn't cover, I took care of. That was my job. I could have worked more. I could have taken out my own loans. No, you needed to focus on your studies. That was the only thing that mattered. Working would have distracted you, maybe cost you grades. I couldn't risk that. But you're still paying them. At your age, you should be retired, comfortable. Instead, you're still working because of me. I took his hand. Listen to me. I made those choices freely. Nobody forced me, and I'd make them again without hesitation. You think those loans are a burden? They're not. Every payment I make, I think about where you are now, what you've accomplished, and I feel proud. That's not a burden. That's a privilege. Jennifer wiped her eyes with her napkin. You're going to make me ruin my makeup. I'm sorry, I said. Don't apologize. These are good tears. She reached across the table and took my other hand. I want you to know something, Dad. When Marcus first introduced us, he talked about you for an hour straight. About how you used to help him with homework even though you didn't understand it, so you'd go to the library and learn it yourself first. About how you never missed a single school event, not one, even if it meant losing pay for the day. About how you taught him to be kind and honest and to work hard for what he wanted. He told me that you were the best man he knew, Jennifer continued. And I thought, okay, of course he thinks that. He's your son. But the more I got to know Marcus, the more I saw that he really meant it. The way he treats people, the way he thinks about the world, his integrity, his work ethic, all of it comes from you. So when my parents had their concerns about our different backgrounds, I told them they were being ridiculous. I told them that Marcus came from the best possible background because he was raised by someone who taught him what actually matters in life. Catherine and Richard returned with dessert, some kind of elaborate tart with fresh berries arranged in a pattern. Catherine set it down and looked at her daughter. You were right, sweetheart. We should have listened to you from the start. Yes, you should have, Jennifer said, but she was smiling. Richard sat down heavily. Robert, I want to ask you something, and please feel free to tell me if I'm overstepping. Those loans you mentioned, the ones you're still paying for Marcus's education, what's the remaining balance? I felt uncomfortable suddenly. That's not something you need to worry about. I'm not worrying, I'm asking. As a gesture of goodwill, and frankly, as an apology for how tonight started, I'd like to pay them off. The room went silent. Marcus stared at his father-in-law. Richard, that's incredibly generous, but we can't accept that. Why not? I have the money. Your father shouldn't still be paying for loans he took out to give you opportunities. He's done enough, more than enough. I shook my head. Thank you, but no, those loans are mine. I took them on willingly, and I'll pay them off. But why? Catherine asked, genuinely puzzled. If we can help, why wouldn't you let us? Because they're not just debt, I said, trying to find the right words. They're a connection to my son's success. Every month when I make that payment, I'm reminded of what we accomplished together. Does that make sense? Richard studied me for a long moment. It does, actually, but the offer stands. If you ever change your mind or if you ever need anything, please don't hesitate to ask. I appreciate that. I do. We ate the tart, which was almost too beautiful to destroy with a fork, and the conversation drifted to lighter topics. Marcus told a funny story about a case he'd worked on. Jennifer talked about a fundraiser her nonprofit was planning. Catherine described a disastrous attempt at making macarons that had ended with her kitchen covered in almond flour. As the evening wound down, I noticed Richard watching me thoughtfully. Finally, he spoke up. Robert, I run a foundation. We fund educational initiatives, scholarships for underprivileged students, that sort of thing. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts sometime about what actually helps immigrant families. What made a difference for you and Marcus? I'm not sure I'd have much to offer, I said. I think you'd have more to offer than most people I talk to. The people we usually consult are academics and policy experts. They mean well, but they've never lived it. You have. I'd be happy to talk with you about it. Good, I'll set something up. Maybe lunch sometime, my treat. Though fair warning, I'll probably take you somewhere expensive and fancy just to make up for Gerald's behavior tonight. I smiled. The diner near my apartment has excellent dumplings, and it's $5 for a full meal. Richard laughed. The diner it is, then. As we prepared to leave, Catherine pulled me aside. Robert, I want to apologize again, not just for tonight, but for assumptions I've made over the past months. When Marcus and Jennifer got engaged, I worried about their compatibility. I worried that they came from such different worlds that they'd struggle to understand each other. But I was looking at the wrong differences. What do you mean? I was focused on money and social status and all these superficial things, but what really matters is values, and you and I actually share the most important one. We both love our children more than anything else in the world. We both want them to be happy and successful. We both would sacrifice anything for them. That's what matters, not the size of our bank accounts or where we live. I thought about that. You're right, though I'll admit when I first walked in here tonight, I felt like I'd entered a different universe. This house? It's just stuff. Beautiful stuff, expensive stuff, but still just stuff. What you gave Marcus, what you sacrificed for him, that's real wealth. That's the kind of inheritance that actually matters. She hesitated. I hope you'll come back. For dinner, for holidays, whenever. I want to get to know you better. The real you, not the person I assumed you were. I'd like that. Jennifer hugged me goodbye, holding on a little longer than necessary. Thank you for being patient with my family tonight, and thank you for raising such an incredible man. I love him so much. I can see that. Take care of each other. Marcus and I walked out to the circular driveway together. The fountain was still running, lit up now with subtle lights that made the water look like liquid gold. Dad, let me drive you home. Please, it's late and the bus schedule is probably terrible right now. I can take the bus. I know you can, but I want to drive you. Let me do this one small thing. I agreed, and we got into his car, which was nice but not ostentatious. As we drove through the quiet streets, Marcus was silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. I feel like I've been living a lie. What do you mean? All this time, I've been in this world of wealth and privilege, working alongside people who grew up with everything handed to them, married into a family like the Hartwells, and I've been pretending I belong there, pretending I'm one of them. But tonight reminded me that I'm not. I'm the son of a landscaper who took the bus and worked night jobs and sacrificed everything so I could have opportunities. And you think that makes you less than them? I asked quietly. No, I think it makes me different. And I think I've been trying to hide that difference instead of honoring it. I watched the streetlights flash by, illuminating his face in intervals. Marcus, you don't belong in their world or in my world. You belong in your own world, the one you built with the tools I gave you and the work you put in. That's not pretending, that's becoming. But I forget sometimes. I forget what you went through, what you're still going through. I live in that brownstone and I have nice things and I make good money, and I forget that you're still in that one-bedroom apartment, still riding the bus, still struggling. I'm not struggling, I said firmly. I have enough, a roof over my head, food to eat, my health mostly intact. I have a son who loves me and who I'm proud of. That's not struggling, that's living. He pulled up to a red light and turned to look at me. Why didn't you tell me about the night jobs? About selling your father's watch? About any of it? Because you were a child. Children shouldn't have to carry their parents' burdens. My job was to make sure you could focus on being a kid, on learning, on growing, not to worry about money or sacrifice. I'm not a child anymore, Dad. No, you're not. But some habits are hard to break. I've spent so many years protecting you from the hard parts of life that I don't know how to do anything else. The light turned green and we drove on. I want to help you, Marcus said. Jennifer and I have been talking about it. We want to pay off those loans. We want to find you a better apartment, maybe in a nicer area. We want to buy you a car. Marcus, please, let me finish. I know you're going to say no. I know you're independent and proud and you don't want charity from your son. But it's not charity, Dad. It's love. It's me wanting to give back a fraction of what you gave me. Let me do that, please. I was quiet for a moment, watching the familiar streets of my neighborhood come into view. The loans are mine to finish. I've already explained why, but I'll make you a deal. When they're paid off, if you want to help me with other things, we can talk about it then. How much longer until they're paid off? 3 years, maybe 4 if interest rates change. Dad, you'll be 66 years old. That's too long. It's the time it takes. I've made my peace with it. He pulled up in front of my building, a 5-story walk-up that had seen better decades. The brick was crumbling in places and the front door needed paint, but it was home. At least let me give you some money. For groceries, utilities, whatever you need. I don't need money, son. I have everything I require. But you shouldn't have to live like this, not after everything you've done. I put my hand on his shoulder. Listen to me carefully. I don't need to live in a mansion to be happy. I don't need expensive things or a fancy car. Those loans will be paid off eventually, and until then, I manage just fine. What I need is to know that you're living your life fully, that you're happy with Jennifer, that you're building something meaningful. That's all I've ever needed. His eyes filled with tears again. I don't deserve you. You deserve everything good in this world. You always have. I opened the car door. Go home to your wife, thank her parents again for dinner, and stop worrying about me. I can't stop worrying about you. You're my father. Then worry a normal amount, not this excessive amount, I smiled. I'll see you Sunday for dinner, right? You promised me your attempt at making dumplings. They're going to be terrible compared to yours. Probably, but I'll eat them anyway and tell you they're wonderful, because that's what parents do. I got out of the car and he rolled down the window. Dad, I love you. I don't say it enough, but I do. I know you do. I love you too, son. I watched him drive away, then climbed the 4 flights of stairs to my apartment. My knees complained on the 3rd floor, and my back sent up warning signals on the 4th, but I made it. Inside, the apartment was exactly as I'd left it. Small but clean, sparse but organized. The furniture was old, some of it salvaged from curbs over the years, but it was comfortable. The walls were bare except for photographs of Marcus at various ages. Marcus at his high school graduation, Marcus at Columbia, Marcus and Jennifer's wedding. I made myself tea and sat in my chair by the window, looking out at the street below. A few people were still out, walking dogs or coming home from late shifts. Somewhere a car alarm went off, and someone yelled at someone else in Mandarin. The sounds of my neighborhood, familiar and constant. I thought about the evening, about Gerald's cruel words and Catherine's apology, about Richard's offer and Marcus's tears, about the duck with cherry sauce and the sparkling water from Italy, about the moment when I'd stood up in that sitting room and told them all the truth about my life. And I realized something. I'd gone into that house feeling small, feeling less than, feeling like I didn't belong. But I'd left feeling exactly the opposite. Because in telling them about my sacrifices, about my choices, about why I lived the way I lived, I'd reclaimed something I hadn't even realized I'd given away. My dignity, my sense of worth, my understanding that value isn't measured in dollars or square footage or the price of your clothes. Gerald had called me poor, and he was right by every conventional measure, but I'd called myself rich, and I'd meant it. Because wealth isn't just what you have, it's also what you've given, what you've built, what you've created through your choices and your love. I had given my son a future. I had built a life from nothing in a country that wasn't mine. I had created meaning out of struggle and purpose out of sacrifice. That was worth more than all the Hartwell money combined. The next morning, I woke early, as I always did, my body trained by decades of landscaping work to rise with the sun. I made my usual breakfast of congee with preserved vegetables, tea without sugar, and sat at my small kitchen table with the newspaper I'd picked up from the bodega downstairs. The owner, Mrs. Kim, always saved me a copy because she knew I came by at the same time every morning. My phone rang, the old-fashioned ringtone loud in the quiet apartment. It was Marcus. "Dad, did I wake you?" "I've been up for an hour. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I just wanted to check on you. Make sure you got home okay last night." "You watched me walk into the building, Marcus. Where else would I be?" I know. I just needed to hear your voice." He paused. "Jennifer's parents called this morning. They wanted to make sure we knew how sorry they were about last night, especially about Gerald." "They already apologized. There's no need to keep doing it. Catherine wants to have lunch with you. Just the two of you. She said she wants to understand more about Chinese culture, about your experience immigrating. I think last night really affected her. I sipped my tea, considering. All right, tell her I'm available most days. I'm only working 3 days a week now. Dad, are you still landscaping? I thought you'd retired. Semi-retired. Mr. Chen's son took over the business, but he still calls me for some of the bigger jobs. Keeps me active, gives me something to do. The money helps too. You shouldn't have to still be working at your age. 62 isn't ancient, Marcus, and I like the work. It's peaceful. Just me and the plants and the earth. Good for thinking. After we hung up, I finished my breakfast and got ready for the day. I had a job scheduled for the afternoon, a regular client in Forest Hills who wanted her garden prepared for fall planting. But first, I had something else to do. I took the bus to the public library, a place I'd spent countless hours over the years. When Marcus was young, we'd come here every Saturday. He'd disappear into the children's section while I studied English grammar books and practiced reading. Later, when he needed help with homework I didn't understand, I'd come here to teach myself algebra, chemistry, history, whatever he was learning so I could help him. The librarian, Ms. Patterson, had worked here for 25 years. She smiled when she saw me. "Robert, haven't seen you in a while. How's Marcus?" "He's wonderful. Got married last year." "I heard. Congratulations. You must be so proud." "Every day." I approached the desk. "I need help finding some information about educational foundations and immigrant services. I'm meeting with someone who runs a foundation, and I want to be prepared." She led me to the computer section and helped me search. Over the next 2 hours, I learned about different models of educational support, scholarship programs, mentorship initiatives. I took notes in my careful handwriting, filling several pages of a small notebook I'd brought. What became clear to me as I read was that most of these programs missed something fundamental. They provided money, which was important, but they didn't provide what had actually made the difference for us. Community. Connection. Someone who believed in you. I thought about Mr. Rodriguez, who'd given me a job when I could barely speak English. About Mrs. Liu from our building, who'd watched Marcus after school when I had to work late. About the teacher, Ms. Freeman, who'd noticed Marcus's potential and pushed him to apply for the gifted program. About the college counselor who'd helped him navigate the scholarship applications. About all the people who'd seen something in my son and decided to invest their time, not just their money. That afternoon, I took the bus to Forest Hills. Mrs. Anderson's garden was overgrown from summer, and she wanted it cleared and prepared for mums and ornamental cabbages. She was in her 70s, a widow who lived alone, and she always insisted on making me lunch. "Robert, you look different today," she said as we sat in her kitchen eating sandwiches she'd prepared. Something happened. Something good. I told her about the dinner, about Gerald's words, about what I'd said to them all. She listened quietly, her hands wrapped around her teacup. "Good for you," she said when I finished. "People need to hear those things sometimes. They need to understand that money isn't everything, that there are different kinds of wealth." She looked at me seriously. "My husband and I had plenty of money. He was a surgeon, very successful. But you want to know a secret? We were miserable for most of our marriage. He worked all the time, and I filled my days with charity events and shopping. We had everything except what mattered. We barely knew our own children. They were raised by nannies and boarding schools." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was our choice. But when he died, and I was left alone in this big house with all this money and these beautiful things, I realized how empty it all was. My children visit twice a year out of obligation. My grandchildren don't know me. I have wealth, Robert, but I'm not rich. Not the way you are." We worked in the garden together that afternoon, her hands in the soil beside mine despite my protests that she was paying me to do the work. "I like it," she insisted. "It reminds me that I'm still alive, still capable of creating something beautiful." As I planted the mums in neat rows, deep purple and golden yellow, I thought about what she'd said. About how you could have everything and still have nothing. About how the things that actually mattered couldn't be bought or sold or inherited. The next week passed quietly. I worked my landscaping jobs, had dinner with Marcus and Jennifer twice, and met Catherine for lunch at a small Chinese restaurant in Chinatown that I suggested. She arrived in a car with a driver, looking slightly out of place in her designer clothes among the plastic tablecloths and fluorescent lights, but she seemed genuinely happy to be there. "I've never been to this neighborhood," she admitted. "I know that sounds terrible for someone who's lived in New York for 40 years. It's never too late to explore." I ordered for both of us in Cantonese, dishes I knew were excellent here: salt and pepper squid, braised eggplant, gai lan with oyster sauce, steamed fish with ginger and scallions. She tried everything, asked questions about the food, about the neighborhood, about my life, and she told me things too, about how she'd grown up wealthy but lonely, parents who were more concerned with status than connection, about how she'd vowed to be different with Jennifer but had ended up making some of the same mistakes, about how Gerald's drinking had been a problem for years, but the family pretended it wasn't because that's what they did, pretended problems didn't exist. "Last night made me realize how much we've failed at what actually matters," she said. "We gave Jennifer everything except the most important thing, a sense of groundedness, an understanding of what real struggle looks like. She had to find that herself through her work with the nonprofit." "She found it," I said. "That's what matters. And she found Marcus, who understands those things deeply, because of you." Catherine set down her chopsticks. "Robert, I want you to know that I meant what I said. I want you to be part of our family, really part of it, not just someone we see at holidays. Richard and I would like you to come to our house for Sunday dinners regularly, if you're willing." "That's very kind." "It's not kindness, it's selfishness. I want to learn from you. I want to understand how you raised such a remarkable son with so little resources. I want to know what we did wrong with all our resources." She smiled sadly. "Money can't buy wisdom, apparently." Over the following months, something unexpected happened. I became a regular at the Hartwell house. Sunday dinners became a tradition. Sometimes it was just the 5 of us. Sometimes other family members joined. Gerald came once, sober, and apologized again with genuine remorse. We talked for a long time that evening about his struggles with alcohol, about how he used cruelty to hide his own insecurities, about how he was trying to be better. Richard and I did meet for lunch, many times. We started at the diner near my apartment as promised, and he loved it so much we kept going back. Over dumplings and coffee, we talked about his foundation. I told him what had actually helped me and Marcus. He listened and took notes, and gradually, the foundation's programs began to change. Less emphasis on just writing checks, more emphasis on mentorship and community building. "You should come work with us," Richard said one day. "Part-time, consulting. Help us redesign our immigrant support programs. We'll pay you, of course." "I'm not qualified for that kind of work." "You're the most qualified person I know. You lived it. That's better than any degree." I thought about it and eventually agreed. 2 days a week, I went to the foundation's offices and met with families, listened to their stories, helped design programs that actually address their needs. It was strange at first, being in an office environment, wearing slightly nicer clothes, using a computer, but it felt meaningful in a way landscaping never had, even though I still loved the physical work. The money from the consulting allowed me to pay off Marcus's loans early. 3 years became 18 months. The day I made the final payment, I called Marcus and told him. He was quiet for a long moment. "How do you feel?" "Lighter," I admitted, "and a little sad. Those loans were part of my identity for so long. And now? Now I get to figure out what comes next." What came next surprised me. With the loans paid off and the consulting income, I had more money than I'd had in decades. Not wealth by Hartwell standards, but enough. Marcus and Jennifer convinced me to move to a better apartment, still in Flushing because I loved my neighborhood, but on the 2nd floor instead of the 4th, with an elevator and 2 bedrooms. "So I have a guest room when you visit," I told them. Catherine helped me decorate it, something I never would have imagined. She had taste I could never afford, but she also understood when I wanted to keep things simple. "This is your space," she reminded me. "It should feel like you, not like some interior designer's portfolio." On my 64th birthday, they threw me a party. Both families, Marcus's friends from work, people from the foundation, neighbors from my building, Mrs. Anderson from Forest Hills. even Mrs. Kim from the bodega. It was held at Marcus and Jennifer's brownstone, and it was chaotic and loud and perfect. Gerald, 2 years sober now, pulled me aside. "I need to thank you, Robert." "For what?" "For not letting that dinner be the end, for giving me a chance to be better. Catherine told me what you said to her later, that everyone deserves grace for their worst moments because we all have them. That meant something to me. It helped me get help." Richard made a toast. "To Robert Chen, who taught us all that the measure of a man isn't his bank account, but his heart, who showed us what real wealth looks like, who built something more valuable than any of us ever could with all our money, a son who makes the world better just by being in it." Marcus stood up, tears already falling. "Dad, I don't have words for what you mean to me. Everything I am, everything I've accomplished, it all comes from you. From your sacrifices, your love, your example. You gave me the world, and all I can do is try to live up to the standard you set." He raised his glass. "To the best father anyone could ask for." I looked around the room at all these people, this strange, beautiful family I'd somehow become part of. The wealthy Hartwells and the struggling immigrants from my building, Marcus's lawyer colleagues and the landscapers I still worked with occasionally. All of them together, all of them celebrating me. And I thought about that night almost 2 years ago now, when I'd walked into that mansion feeling small and inadequate, when Gerald had mocked me for being poor, for taking the bus, for not belonging in their world, when I'd stood up and told them the truth about my life, about my choices, about what real wealth meant. That moment had changed everything. Not because it changed who I was still the same person, still living simply, still finding meaning in hard work and sacrifice. But it changed how they saw me. More importantly, it changed how I saw myself. I wasn't poor. I was rich beyond measure, rich in love, in purpose, in the knowledge that I'd lived my life in service of something greater than myself, my son. And through him, all the good he would do in the world, all the lives he would touch, all the meaning he would create. That was my legacy. Not money or property or things that could be bought and sold, but a human being who knew how to love, how to work, how to treat people with dignity and respect. A man who understood that true wealth came from what you gave, not what you took. As the party continued around me, as people laughed and ate and celebrated, I felt a profound sense of peace. My life hadn't been easy. There had been struggle and sacrifice, loneliness and loss. But it had been a good life, a meaningful life, a rich life in every way that mattered. And in the end, that was all anyone could hope for. Not to have the most, but to give the most. Not to accumulate wealth, but to create it through love and sacrifice and the deliberate daily choice to make the world better for someone else. They'd mocked me for being poor. But that one moment, when I'd found the courage to tell my truth, had revealed something they couldn't see, that I was the wealthiest man in the room, and I always had been.